go over some things from your readings this week, just kind of hit some high points of it. And this PowerPoint I'm going to share with you is available in the course shell, but I just kind of want to point out some things and see if anything really stood out to you through your reading. So this week in your module basically gets into ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, and brings out some high points in chapter 6. A little bit in your schools, once you get into some various areas, depending on what your job description is, and I didn't even realize this until I was a superintendent, about being susceptible to ADA audits within your buildings. And I don't know if you've even heard of your building administrators talk about that, but they do come in periodically and do an audit just on your facilities, where you'll have an auditor go in and check for door widths, accessibilities to entryway and exit ways. They'll even go as far as with ADA and checking the tension, how much tension is on the doorways to your restrooms as well. I mean, they get that in depth. Does anyone know why they would even do that on your tension on your doors? Anyone have any idea why they may do that? No?
So it doesn't slam on a wheelchair?
So it doesn't, yeah, exactly right. So if you have an emergency, they come in so it doesn't slam on a wheelchair, or so the tension is not so great that if they have to make an emergency exit out of there, they're going to have difficulty prying that door open. Also, what about are some requirements that schools have to meet for individuals that are deaf or hard of hearing pertaining to ADA? So you want to have any ideas on that? What's the type of system that all your school buildings have that we would have to accommodate the hard of hearing in case of emergency?
Well, the noise, we have like alarms and then like flashing lights for people.
Exactly right. So on your fire alarm systems, that's why you see the flashing strobe lights on that. So that's another. So it's simple little things like that we all have to meet the requirements that go along with the Americans with Disabilities Act. So I just kind of want to point out a few things there, but a lot of this pertains to your employers and anything in the private or public sector, making sure that they have equal access and equal opportunities. Kind of the purpose of it provides a narrow view. You can see that it involves a lot of things just in the private and public sectors, dealing with employment, housing, public accommodations, education, transportation, going with schools. What do we have to make sure that we meet ADA requirements in our transportation for public schools?
We have to provide special education busing for our kiddos.
Exactly right. Exactly right. A lot of schools do, whether you do it in district or whether you transport those students out of district if you're a member of a co-op. As far as the equipment itself that you're transporting them in, what do you have to make sure that you have available in your district? What piece of equipment must be included on buses? What was that?
Seat belts and chair lifts.
Yeah, chair lifts on your buses. Yeah, exactly. So you need to make sure that you have those available in your districts too. I'm sure most of them do, especially in your larger districts. Now you might be in a small one where they may not have one. So, and they may not have anybody that's wheelchair accessible at this time. So communication. Where do you see that falling into the school side as far as communication to meet ADA? And going back to the ADA audit, this is one thing that they will look at as well. So what are ways that schools communicate and kind of showcase their district and advertise for their district? Every school pretty much has it. Anybody know?
Websites.
Websites. Yeah, exactly. So within that website, depending on what vendor you use on the back side, whoever the administrator of that website is, a lot of times it'll have tools in there that you can click that will provide those services to meet ADA. So if you have text on there, it will read that text to the individual. and provide that in case they can't see, they can hear it. So those are some of the accommodations that are embedded within a lot of school websites. Recreational, institutionalization, health services, voting. When you go to voting polls, you probably see accommodation for handicapped folks, and then access to public services. So who are protected? Also, ADA kind of mirrors Section 504. We talked a little bit about maybe the differences between 504 and IEP last week when we touched base, asked you a question or two related to that. So basically, it talks about substantially limits a major life activity. So exclusions would be, you can see it lists there: old age, broken limbs, pregnancy, obesity, gender identity, compulsive gamblers, and use of illegal drugs are exclusions to it. So it talked a little bit about some Supreme Court cases, and then also there was some amendments in 2008 that provides much broader coverage for ADA. So some expanded definitions would have been walking, standing, lifting, reading, sleeping. A lot of times on job descriptions, if you look at your school handbooks or when they're advertising for positions, a lot of times to meet ADA requirements, they list specific duties that are going to be required of that position to make sure those individuals understand that before they apply for that. So here are some different titles that go with ADA. One is dealing with employment, making sure they have equal opportunity. We don't discriminate against anyone due to a disability they may have. Title II deals with public services, especially transportation. Title III is public accommodations for services operated by both private entities and public as well. Title IV is telecommunications, kind of going back to what I referenced with school websites. We're a public entity, we have to make sure our website meets ADA requirements. And in Title V, there's miscellaneous provisions. So I won't read all these to you. I just wanted to point out some specific things to you. Title I, dealing with employment. Just making sure that there's no discrimination against anyone by an employer toward a potential employee that's perhaps applying for that job. Here there was an example that was included in this PowerPoint. You can see I mentioned job function. You can zoom in on this at your leisure if you want to go back and look at this, but it is a screenshot of a school district and it lists their essential functions to meet their ADA standards. So I just included that in a screenshot to share with you. The next section, it gets into talking about public services, that you cannot discriminate for transportation, or any public or government entities cannot. Public accommodations operated by private sector. It gets into a little bit about the public side, dealing with private schools, dealing with private homes, anything private business. It talks a little bit about some of the guidelines they must follow. Telecommunications, get into, talks about TTY system for deaf, also closed captioning on TV. Has to be provided, and that's enforced by the FCC or Federal Communications Commission. Just some miscellaneous under Title V. It talks a little bit about states are not immune, and retaliation and coercion is prohibited. ADA does not apply a lesser standard than Section 504 that we deal with in the education setting, and they encourage parties to encourage disputes on their own. So the next thing it gets into is a little bit about ESSA, Elementary Secondary Education Act, and some of the guidelines that were brought forth at that time. What I found interesting, and I don't know if you did, if you had a chance to flip through this, about some of the things they keyed in on, they felt like was a major problem during those times when this was first enacted, like in 1965. And then if you kind of progress through these slides and look at when it was updated and amended over time, you'll see the same problems existed each time they amended this, all the way back to 65, even to where we are now. And so they would enact various programs, a lot of times that were initiated by the sitting president. War on poverty, you probably read a little bit about it, heard a little bit about it when it was initiated, and aid for disadvantaged students. We still do that today through Title I monies, right? We have programs that focus on that, and students that come from high poverty backgrounds. And over time, you can see a lot of the goals that were set forth. You can see all the way back to 1989, when they had an educational summit. And if you look at some of the goals, you look at what was established and you think, man, at times we're almost appears that we might be going backward. If you look at them, some of the goals that were set talked about all children ready to start for school. We do that through Head Start programs. Most communities, most districts do that, or they have their own pre-K to try to get children ready. It's a big deal here in Oklahoma, and I'm sure it is in the states in which you reside in. Higher graduation rates. According to the summit, it was 90%. Do you think we're achieving 90% nationwide right now? You guys feel like that's accurate? No, probably not. So competency testing for grades 4, 8, 12 on challenging materials. Well, they started that, and then on with No Child Left Behind, high stakes testing came in. And so it's just been an ongoing pattern. So that still occurs to this day. Increase in math and science. I want to be the first in the world. I don't know, going back and looking at history, if the United States was ever first at all. If you go back, it's kind of interesting to see where we actually sit. Lifelong learning, adult literacy, and in safe and well-disciplined schools. Now, this one's interesting. I want to point it out. It seems like over time, especially in the last 5 years, we are seeing more and more behavioral disorders in our schools. Okay. And then you also look at our communities and what's going on across the country, not only in schools, but just in society in general. It's almost like we're going backward the last couple of years. There's a lot of, I'm trying to think of the word for it, but it's certainly not settled for sure. I mean, it's not calm. We're almost going backward there, where it's becoming out of control. Do you guys feel like in the last few years, schools appear to be well disciplined and safe? You look at your mass shootings, it seems like over time we're seeing more and more of those. You feel like we've gone backward? Anybody have any feedback on that? No, everyone's quiet tonight.
I'll speak.
Yeah.
I actually teach in a juvenile detention facility.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, so I see a lot of the kids that come in for violence. I mean, I've had kids in there that have set fires in school.
Yeah.
Well, and I've had ones that murder. And that, you know, I've seen a lot of violence, and we're getting more. I can tell you that where I'm working, we're getting more and more of the violent offenders and kids that are getting now mapped at 15 years old because of the crime, you know, and it's scary, you know, to think. And it makes me feel sad for these kids because, you know, the hurt or whatever that's going on inside of them that's causing all of this. It's really heartbreaking.
Yes, and you're probably seeing more and more kids flow through that juvenile detention center.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, you're welcome. No, I appreciate the feedback and sharing your experience in that aspect of education in that facility. And it gives you a whole different perspective. And you almost, it goes back to what I just said. It almost seems like some of these areas that we're kind of going backward even
Yeah.
looking at some of the initiatives that were started previously back in history, and then looking to where we're at now. So that's why I would challenge you to go back and look at some of these slides in detail when it talks about these different initiatives and compare it to where we are now. ESSA was reauthorized in '94, and again, just continuing funding for Title I. As time goes on, we get more and more funding in Title I to help meet the needs of those students coming from impoverished backgrounds. Most of you guys, I don't know if you've been in this long enough. I have been. I remember in '01, No Child Left Behind, and even the previous initiative that I talked about. So No Child Left Behind, the one main thing that I remember coming out of that was high stakes testing. It seemed like there was a lot of pressure that was put on teachers in schools due to high stakes testing, and then going back, and a lot of schools developed, that's kind of where your school report cards came into play, making adequate yearly progress, and they would go back and use some factors not only due to achievement, but also tie in factors such as attendance into that as well. So, and then it would come up with an overall grade for your district. One of the things with that was that all schools, their goal was that all schools, all students, 100% proficient by the year 2013 and 2014. Okay, you got to remember, going back, this was enacted in 2001. Well, here we are in 2022. Have we achieved that? That's a big definite no, right? Didn't achieve it in 2013-14. We definitely haven't achieved it for 2022, where all schools, all students are 100% proficient. Okay. You can see some of the goals that were enacted in 2001 for that: high achievement, highly qualified teachers, safe and drug-free schools, ELLs will be proficient in English, and all students graduate from high school. Okay, so we haven't met the high achievement, meaning the 100% proficiency. Highly qualified teachers, you think that rings true for today in 2022? Anybody have any comment on that?
I guess I would say no. We're having an awful time even filling positions, or even finding, and then the push for like highly qualified substitutes and things like that. They're not paras, all of it, and we're having a hard time hiring people. So
exactly. No, I agree with you. Yeah, 100%.
I think our district is the same way. We have, I think, like 30% of our district is actually not licensed right now. They are still going through their undergrad programs to finish their licensure. They just needed a body that was more than 75% through the program to put in classrooms to fill the spots.
Yeah.
It is horrific, the amount of numbers of unlicensed teachers we have in our district right now.
Well, I know that they recently changed the requirements for substitute teachers. 18 years old with a high school diploma.
Yeah.
They're that desperate for them. And I don't think our district has, but I know a few in Topeka have hired student teachers even before they're, like you said, even before they're done.
Definitely. Yeah, I think you'll see that it's becoming a widespread problem. And I want to point that out. I think that's definitely an area where we're going backward compared to the goal that was established in 2001, right? So here they're in the state of Oklahoma, they're approving emergency certified teachers right and left. If they got a degree in another area, they are, or alternative certifications. So seeing the same thing here, and really the last 2 years has set a record. The State Department of Education here in Oklahoma on issuing emergency and alternative certificates for teachers. So definitely going backward. Safe and drug-free schools, I think probably there we have fell short in that area as well. If you go back and look at school shootings and then things that are going on right now as far as drug related, looking at vaping, every school you talk to seems like it's having vaping problems going on. So Again, it's interesting to go back in time when these initiatives were enacted to see the goals and then see where we're at now. You can see here some of the accountability standards that came along with No Child Left Behind. I won't read through all those with you. I kind of hit on those briefly in a comment a while ago. Statewide standards, improving low performing schools, and then adequate yearly progress through report cards. Every child, or I'm sorry, ESSA, Every Student Succeeds Act, was reauthorized in 2015. And so they kind of revamped it a little bit, dealing with high academic standards, testing, supporting preschool, evidence-based interventions. So those were some of the things. So again, for the sake of time, I would encourage you to go back. There's just a couple of slides left before it ends. I would challenge you to go back, review those, look at them, and do some more comparison of where we're at now compared to when those were enacted. So definitely big changes over time. So was anybody in public education when No Child Left Behind came about, 2001? Anybody been in it that long? No? Most of you guys were probably in elementary or high school, aren't you? So that was big, really. No Child Left Behind. That was big. That kind of started the beginning of high stakes testing and school report cards. And I don't know if the state of Kansas does school report cards at all. It got to be a big deal here in Oklahoma. And then when COVID came around, they waived those for a couple of years due to the disruption of services and testing and all that. So it's supposed to come back online here this year. I don't really know what data they're going to use as far as testing data to help compile those. So it's going to be interesting. But does anyone have any questions over that? I kind of went through it quickly. I just kind of wanted to share it with you and point out a few interesting facts from some of the assigned readings through that PowerPoint that is available in the course shell. You go in there and look at like week 3 Zoom recording. You can pop it up and it'll have that PowerPoint there. So looking at the assignment coming up, dues, everyone good? Having questions? Any confusion? Everyone feel all right about it? Rocking along?
So on top of comparing,
Yeah.
we're writing a summary comparing a law against IDA, but then there also needs to be a concept map. Is that correct?
Yeah, just include that concept map and then right below it, create your concept map, and then just right below it, you can write a summary about the content and how they compare and contrast. Okay, so it doesn't have to be that long. It's pretty short summary. Okay. Any other questions? No? Okay. Well, I won't keep you much longer if everyone feels good. If you have questions, just please email me. You guys know I check them first thing in the morning, then I do again in the evening. So if I miss you on the front side, I'll get you in the evening and return your message, okay? All right, you guys stay warm, stay safe during the snow. Enjoy your days off.